Hey guys, Emmanuel here, and before I jump into this video, I just want to ask you guys to like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to do that. Okay, now that that's over, guys, the Kevin Durant drama continues. This time, it's not looking good for Kevin Durant at all. So, if you haven't heard, recently Kevin Durant flew to London and he had a meeting with the Brooklyn Nets owner, Joe Tsai, and in that meeting, he reiterated that he still wants to be traded from the Brooklyn Nets. And after that meeting, the NBA world has started to resent Kevin Durant, specifically NBA executives. Why? Because in that meeting, he demanded that either Joe Tsai get rid of both Coach Steve Nash and General Manager Sean Marks, or he get rid of him. And that is why NBA executives just are not fond of Kevin Durant as of right now, because he's setting a dangerous precedent from their point of view for the future. The precedent that gives more power to the player over the GMs. So in this regard, if Kevin Durant can get away with this, it asks the question, who's boss? Is Kevin Durant Sean Marks' boss? Or is Sean Marks the guy who actually signed Kevin Durant's boss? You can see the problem that NBA executives and people higher up in the NBA have a problem with this, especially when you consider the facts. And the facts are, Kevin Durant actually chose Sean Marks to be the general manager of the Brooklyn Nets. And now that everything isn't going good and everything isn't, is peachy, and they've had terrible season after season for the last 3 seasons, Kevin Durant is calling for him to be fired. And this isn't unprecedented. I mean, LeBron does this all the time, but LeBron does it differently, right? LeBron at least doesn't ridicule the guy that he vouched for. LeBron doesn't embarrass him or call for his job or call for him to be fired. But Kevin Durant is doing exactly that. I mean, this is the guy that you wanted, right? Steve Nash, I could understand. Wanting Steve Nash to be fired, I could completely understand, because Steve Nash had no business coaching a high-profile team like the Brooklyn Nets. Why? Because, Steve Nash, prior to getting the coaching job with the Brooklyn Nets, had 0 experience in coaching. Not at the collegiate level, not as an assistant, not even high school. Steve Nash should have not been coaching the Brooklyn Nets, because there were other coaches that had that experience, that were more experienced than him. I mean, the Brooklyn Nets could have went out and gotten Coach Fizdale, but they chose Steve Nash, and I don't understand why. And B, Steve Nash was just not equipped to deal with the egos of superstar and hyper-talented players like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Guys that are that talented often come with huge egos, right? Because that talent comes with money, and with money, you want more power. More power comes with more ego. And it takes a special kind of coach to be able to herd those kinds of ego and keep everyone in check, but not ruff everyone's feathers, right? For example, I want to give you guys an example. Phil Jackson is the best example of this. Phil Jackson coached the Lakers and the Bulls. So he had to manage the personalities and the egos of Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, and Dennis Rodman, the most wackiest guy ever. And when we watched that Last Dance documentary, there were days, nights when Dennis Rodman would just want to get up and go to Vegas to wrestle. I mean, and Phil Jackson would have to find a way in order to satisfy Dennis Rodman and also satisfy Michael Jordan by having Dennis Rodman in the lineup when it's game time. And not only that, Phil Jackson also had to deal with the egos of Kobe and Shaquille O'Neal at their peaks. That is a tall order to ask. And you know how feisty those guys were. There was that infighting. So when you have a team like the Brooklyn Nets who had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving but had James Harden at one point, you need a guy who can balance personalities, who can balance egos. And Steve Nash was just not up to the job. He was not up to the task. He was not the right guy. Even with that being said, it's not like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving made life easier for Steve Nash. No. Do you guys remember when Kyrie Irving got up on a podium and he said, with the camera on him, with a straight face, that him and Kevin Durant don't need to be coached, that they were good enough to coach themselves? See, that does not help the team. That doesn't help the organization, because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving set the tone for the rest of the team in Brooklyn, because they're the 2 best guys. And when they disregard their coach, the guys that are under them, the guys that are less talented than them, are not going to fall in line. And that makes the job harder for a rookie coach and an unexperienced coach like Steve Nash already. And you can see how this manifested in the playoffs when the Brooklyn Nets played against the Boston Celtics. When I watched that series, the Nets seemed so out of place when they were playing. It seemed like they were playing street ball. You get a chance, you get a chance. There was no cohesiveness, there was no teamwork. Why? Because, well, they weren't running plays. They were not running plays. They didn't trust their head coach, right? They thought they could just do it themselves. And you're not going to win, you're not going to do anything when you don't have some sort of cohesiveness, some sort of camaraderie, some sort of unity under your head coach that can lead you, right? And you saw that, and that didn't help the Brooklyn Nets. And furthermore, do you guys remember the amount of dysfunction that Kyrie Irving brought to the Brooklyn Nets? I mean, Kyrie Irving would get up and just leave for 1 week to go party, and he wouldn't tell Steve Nash, he wouldn't tell his teammates. That's not good for the chemistry of the team. That's not good for the organization. And who's to blame for that? I think it's partially Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Why? Because Kevin Durant is the one that opted to have Kyrie Irving on a team. He joined Kyrie Irving. That's a stupid decision. That's Kevin Durant's fault. He left a brilliant head coach like Steve Kerr, a brilliant point guard, Stephen Curry, to join the dysfunctional Kyrie Irving and a rookie head coach. That's all on Kevin Durant. So he can point fingers and blame Steve Nash and Sean Marks all the time. But I think Kevin Durant needs to take a look in the mirror, because a lot of the problems that the Brooklyn Nets faced or are facing stem from Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It's them, it's their fault. And recently, Kyrie Irving has started to do some introspective work and look inward and think, I think I've been dysfunctional. I mean, he did that with LeBron when he said in Cleveland, I just didn't understand. But Kevin Durant needs to do that instead of pointing fingers and calling for the jobs of his head coach and the GM. Because a lot of the dysfunction, a lot of the things we're seeing right now, they came from Kevin Durant. And all of this finger pointing and this blame game that Kevin Durant is doing is hurting his chances of getting traded. I imagine that's why Kevin hasn't been traded yet. It's been 2 months since he requested the trade, and nothing's happened. For contrast, if LeBron James was to ask for a trade today, he would be traded by the end of the week. That is the contrast and respect that LeBron commands in this league because of the way that he's carried himself in this league, right? Because of the decisions he's made in this league. Kevin Durant, he's 34, but still behaves like a 22-year-old. Whether it's arguing with people online, blaming his GM, contributing to the dysfunction of the team. I mean, the team was so dysfunctional that James Harden didn't even last 6 months. James Harden was used to stability in Houston. Year in, year out, they'd make the playoffs every year. They would go into at least the second round or the conference finals. And James Harden was teammates with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant for less than 6 months, and he said, I can't take this. And that's on Kevin Durant. I think that's on Kevin Durant because he's the one that made the decision to leave a good thing Golden State with Steve Kerr, Joe Lacob, Bob Myers, Stephen Curry to join Joe Tsai, Sean Marks, rookie head coach, and a dysfunctional point guard in Kyrie Irving. That is not going to get you traded, right? Because, listen, what kind of GM is going to trade for a player that is going to call for them to be fired when the road gets bumpy or things aren't peachy? No GM, that's who. Why would I do that? Why would I trade for you if you're going to one day call for my job? That and the fact that Kevin Durant is 34, that doesn't help his case. And then furthermore, him actually just requesting for a trade doesn't help to alleviate the narrative surrounding Kevin Durant that he can't win without Stephen Curry. So those are my thoughts on the Kevin Durant drama that's currently going on in the NBA right now. But guys, if you like this kind of content, then this is a channel for you. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. And until next time, kids.